this is the classical continuity system. This is basically your standard shooting style, just to cover the basics, really. This is what's been used historically from the beginning of the last century, from about the 1910s through to basically the early 60s, when the studio system in Hollywood was in effect. And everything was basically a production workflow system. And at the time, these films which we see as classics were just other films in their turnaround. So it's amazing that there were artists and directors at the time who managed to create works of art within those constraints. In that process, there was the language of cinema was developing, and they developed what was called the Hollywood continuity system. And the idea is basically capturing coverage. And coverage is making sure that you get enough information to be able to tell your story. And this is what we really want to get away from if we want our work to stand out. It's the difference between a competent director and a good or great director, really. Now, there are different elements to continuity, and I'll show you some basic setups. It's important to know it because it's a good way of, if you have the ideas of the continuity shooting system in your head, it's a good way of making sure that you get all the shots you need. That's one way of doing it. And it can also be useful at times as well, even if it can be a bit pedestrian. So, continuity style shooting and editing system is a system that ensures individual shots, when assembled, create the illusion of seamless time, movement, and space, regardless of the sequence in which those shots were originally filmed. So, what happens is you get your scene, you break it down into your shots, and then you often shoot those shots out of order, because just for economic purposes, you don't want to basically shoot all your shots here, go back, and shoot, and keep going backwards and forwards. You shoot all one direction first with your lighting, then you turn around and shoot the other direction with your lighting. So you're shooting things out of sequence. So you need to be planned to enable you to do that. There are a few people who manage to do things, shoot more linearly, their screenplay. Nicholas Winding Refn famously shoots everything in sequence in his films. I don't know how he manages to get away with it. I'd imagine he manages to keep it cheap. That's the only way you can do that, really. The continuity system is designed to depict scenes clearly, ensuring that the spatial and temporal relationships among characters, objects, and events are consistently understandable. Now, Hollywood is an American art. Well, cinema was predominantly an American art. It was French and other places as well, but it took off in Hollywood in the US. US, particularly at the turn of the last century, was a melting pot. So there are many people there who didn't necessarily speak English as their first language, and it's a popular art form. So there was an emphasis in the art form to reinforce messages. So the classic thing in classical Hollywood is that you say your message 3 times. You say it in dialogue, you say it in action, you show it in music. And it's reinforcing that message so everybody gets the idea. And that kind of stayed consistent, really. And it's really about comprehension, making sure no one's lost and everybody's still engaged at an entertainment level, because it was seen as an entertainment art form. The defining characteristics of continuity style is to make each transition from one shot to the next as smooth and seamlessly as possible. Sorry, seamless as possible. This is known as invisible editing. Now, the Russians were doing something different. When you got Eisenstein and people like that, they were using it more in terms of as an art form, which is very, very interesting. And then what happens, the way Hollywood particularly works, is it absorbs this culture and repurposes it or hegemonizes it and turns it into, keeping the form alive, really. So it's good to know these different styles and these different histories of filmmaking. So the important thing to remember is planning in advance is essential. This is known as shooting for the edit, okay? So you're getting your coverage. You're basically getting coverage, your raw materials that can then be assembled in the edit by an editor in different ways, okay? That's how it's done. One interesting fact to bear in mind, Hollywood, traditionally, editing was seen as a female job. So you had a lot more editors were female in the classical Hollywood, because it was seen as being equivalent to sewing, like sewing the film together. Bizarre, but that's the case, and you can still see that today with like a Shoemaker, which is Scorsese's editor, Mary Sweeney worked with David Lynch. It's been a strong tradition of female editors, and editing is a good route into directing that people often take. Use the master scene method of shooting. So you're shooting a shot of the whole scene, usually a wide, before getting close-ups, mediums, point of views, and shot reverse shots. So that's usually the way you work. You start with your master. That usually is a wide. It usually gets the whole of the scene, and then you go in for closer detail each time. And this is like the the coverage system of getting everything that you need. Shooting coverage with the continuity system means you have plenty of angles in post for your editor to work with. Now, in the States, I mean, this is like, my background is I've worked in a post-production house in Soho for a number of years, and we were a VFX house and did like lots of top-end movie titles like James Bond, and we did some pop promos like Radiohead and stuff like that, but also TV commercials and things like that, and award-winning stuff. Opened up an office in the States, and the first thing we noticed was a lot of the directors, certainly in commercials in the States, the directors didn't even attend the edit session, which was baffling to people in the UK. The idea here was that the director sees everything through the process, but in the States, it's like the director gets the coverage, and it's really the producer and the brand manager who sees the project all the way through, which was really kind of an interesting perspective, and yet the directors still get all the credit, of course.